Do you know what the different parties believe when it comes to business and commerce? Well, it's time for some Straight Talk Texas about exactly that. That's right, it's that time again for some Straight Talk. I'm Bunker Bob Steinhagen, and this is The Bunker Bob Show. Well, that's right. Good afternoon and welcome back, my friends. It's that time again. That's right, all my friends, my conversationalists across the fruited plains of Texas. It is time for some discussion and an overview of what the differences in the political parties are when it comes to business and commerce, because this is a fundamental of our free enterprise system. And of course, as America was founded on a principle of the free market, that is where I want to begin today when we look at the different platforms. The Republican Party platform credits the free market with cultivating entrepreneurship and a culture of innovation, which is revitalizing the nation's space capabilities, thank you, Elon Musk, saving taxpayer money and advancing technology critical to maintain America's edge in space and in other fields. Republicans also see cronyism as a violation of government role and sees using taxpayer funding to private companies as a distortion of the free market and a violation of the public trust. Finally, Republicans recognize the central reason why the 20th century came to be called the American century. It was because of the ability of individuals to invent and create in a land of free markets. Libertarians have a lot to say about the free market, starting with the verbiage, libertarians support free markets. Libertarians defend the right of individuals to form commercial enterprises, oppose all forms of government subsidies and bailouts to business, labor, or any other special interest, and oppose government competing with private enterprise. The platform is permeated with an emphasis toward a free market, including education, which they say is best provided by the free market. So public schools are not a favorite of libertarians. Healthcare, as well as technological innovations and behavioral changes required to protect our environment and ecosystems. Libertarians flatly reject government charter of corporations and call for a separation of business and state. Democrat platform has no reference to or mention of free markets. Now, Greens want to reduce what they call the economic and political power of large corporations, end corporate personhood, and redesign corporations to serve our society, democracy, and, of course, the environment. Their government-centric green solutions include federal chartering of corporations that includes comprehensive, strict, and enforceable social responsibility requirements, strengthen the civil justice system to ensure that it holds corporations strictly liable for corporate crime, fraud, violence, and malfeasance. When we look at the state platforms, the Texas Republicans understand that our economic success depends on free market principles. Plank 69 on government mandates states that no government entity may require a business via financial or legal coercion to act as an enforcement arm of the state, such as the egregious action when local governments required businesses to enforce mask mandates or be fined or closed. Texas libertarians reflect the same view of the free market as Republicans and they do an excellent job of expanding on these basic principles, stipulating that all people should be equal before the law, free to deal with one another in a free market, the only system compatible with the principle of individual rights. Taxation should be used only for services that cannot be provided by the free market. And the way I like to say it is that government should only act when it can do the most good for the most people at the least cost. In fact, I'm going to be presenting that at the next Republican convention to be part of the preamble. LP Texas supports eliminating barriers to the free market construction and maintenance of infrastructure. Libertarians also support free market-based healthcare systems and health insurance, which flies in the face of the Democrat plan and the Green Party plan. And Libertarians of Texas support free, fair, and voluntary exchange of currency, goods, labor, services, and ideas, whereby all may prosper through free market principles and individual responsibility. Not a surprise. Neither Texas Democrats nor Greens have anything to say about the free market. However, when it comes to regulating the free market, specifically private businesses, both the Green Beans and Democrats are in lockstep. Greens call not merely for greater oversight of regulation, but for a moral economy. A moral economy. Remember, if you watched the last few shows, I highlighted the fact that the worldview of Greens and Democrats is naturalistic, that their morals don't come from a compass. Their morals are whatever they feel at the time. So if their morals don't align with something that they say that they believe, well, they'll just move the bar. They call not merely for greater oversight of regulation, but directly planned by the community and implemented by workers managing their own workplaces, that seeks human liberation from all forms of oppression, exploitation, and hierarchy, as well as to create an ecological society in harmony with the rest of nature. And that's a little curious to me, because when you start reading through the platform, as you start looking at some of the things that they say in other parts of the platform, you'll notice, well, they actually are okay with it, especially if government is in charge. So oppression and exploitation is okay for government, but not for those bad corporations. Likewise, Democrats will direct federal regulators to review a subset of the mergers and acquisitions that have taken place since the evil Trump took office, directing regulators to consider potential effects of future mergers on the labor market, on low-income and marginalized communities, and on racial equity. And I talked about on the last show that what equity, the difference between equity and equality, they are two different things. Equality is we all start at the same place. We all have the same opportunity. Equity means we all end up in the same place. And that's what the Democrats are pushing for. Democrats also want regulators to consider breaking up corporations if they find they are using their market power to engage in anti-competitive activities. And I'm not sure exactly how you would define an anti-competitive activity. Is it something like Google does with social media, where they won't allow any conservative opinion on YouTube or Facebook, where if you disagree with their opinions, they basically are going to push you off. And since there's really no other competition, well, I'm guessing Democrats agree that these big technology firms should be regulated and prevented from engaging in censorship. Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of something else. I thought Democrats are okay with it as long as their voice is heard and it quashes all others. Now, libertarians don't specifically address regulating businesses, but they do see the only proper role of government in the economy realm is to protect property rights, adjudicate disputes, and provide a legal framework in which voluntary trade is protected. If that's government's only role, then regulation of any form or function would be out of bounds. And I want to make this point, because if they really believe that, then what you're going to see coming up in a little bit will contradict that, which demonstrates libertarians are not as libertarian as they say that they are. Republicans believe that overregulation is the quiet tyranny of the nanny state. It hamstrings American businesses and hobbies and hobbles economic growth. Republicans are determined to make regulations minimally intrusive, confined to their legal mandate, and respectful toward the creation of new and small businesses. Texas Republicans want to repeal federal minimum wage and prevailing wage laws, Dodd-Frank, Sarbanes-Oxley, and the Lacey Act. They also want to see state blue laws and three-tier alcohol system production, distribution, and retail eliminated and allow auto manufacturers to sell directly to consumers. How refreshing. I'm going to be talking about Dodd-Frank, Sarbanes-Oxley, and these acts that have gone into effect and in a little bit, because it really drives home why those Republicans want to do that. Texas Libertarians believe that the exercise of an occupation or profession should be regarded as a natural right, not subject to regulation or taxation by government. So in other words, government should not require licensing of someone who cuts your hair. I don't think that's a bad thing. I would agree with that. Democrats want to enact stronger laws and regulations to protect low-income communities and communities of color from environmental racism and environmental justice. They don't really mean that, but that's what they say. Promote what they call as the responsible regulation of emergent technologies to ensure that they serve the needs of the people instead of benefiting the proprietors of a technology. Well, that's interesting. And provide free tuition for all low-income students and reduce tuition for middle-class students at public universities in Texas, as well as rollback of tuition and fees to previous affordable levels with appropriate regulation reinstated moving forward. I've got news for those on the left. Something that they've never learned is that if you give something away, if something is free, you value it much less than if you have to pay for it. But Democrats, Greens, they don't get that idea. They think that if you give something to someone, they're going to value it. But more importantly, the reason, watch this, the reason Democrats do this is because they want to continue to keep those who are in the party enslaved, and I'm using that word specifically, because they want you to be dependent on them. If you're enslaved, you must do whatever they say and jump through whatever hoops that they want. They want you to dance. Well, guess what? You're going to dance to get all of the great resources that they're going to provide to you. The Green Party of Texas calls for regulations that will prioritize democracy and environmental awareness over monetary profits. Did you see that? They want to prioritize democracy and environmental awareness over monetary profits. So if you are a business, do not expect to make a profit. That is not your goal. Your goal is to be sure that you are environmentally aware and that democracy reigns in your company. They seek to advance an eco-socialist, anti-capitalist perspective. To be very clear, what you are seeing on your screen is a direct copy and paste from every platform. I don't rewrite or try to abbreviate or anything what you see on the screen. This is directly from each one of the party platforms. So what you're seeing is true. Employees and communities must be given the same rights as stockholders in the decision-making process of corporations. So in other words, if you own a business, if you're an LLP, for instance, a limited liability corporation, your employees have just as much say as you do. True cost pricing must be used in taxing companies and would include the amount of energy needed to produce an item as well as waste from the production process and the recyclable aspects of the product itself when its life is all over. Try to imagine how that would become a reality. How many government employees would it take to regulate, to maintain, to create the regulations and to watch over? And then how many lawyers, attorneys would a small business have to make sure that they're compliant with all of these regulations. Materials that are not recyclable must be banned from productions. No more iPhones, both in the manufactured item itself and its packaging. Energy standards for acceptable recycling must be established. If it takes more energy to recycle a product than it did to produce it originally, then the product is not recyclable. I'm guessing they're bothered by the little recycling symbol that some products have on it, when in fact it takes more energy to recycle it than not. I have no problem with that. And see, there are times where they may say something that we would agree with, that is actually rational and sane. I have no problem with that, because that would be false advertising. Manufacturers should prioritize durability and longevity of products over profits and money. Read that again. Manufacturers should prioritize durability and longevity of products over profits and money flow, and abandon short-term and self-destructing products designed to force consumers into repeat buys. That to me is an interesting one. You don't want you don't want your customers to come back? Well, I don't know. That's a tough one. Now, when it comes to banking, the hot topic is the Dodd-Frank legislation that President Obama signed into law in 2010 following the 2008 banking crisis. Republicans are committed to overturning this regulatory nightmare, which I'll talk about in a little bit, which actually harms community banks and savings and loans and provides nearly half of all small business loans and over 3/4 of all agricultural loans. It is touted by the left as a law that regulates financial markets and protects customers, but within the 800+ pages of Dodd-Frank is a regulatory approach that relies on the federal government to plan, protect, and prop up the financial system. So rather than ending the too big to fail problem, Dodd-Frank has actually enshrined it into law. Now, most people believe that the financial crisis of 2008 stemmed from unregulated financial markets. That's just not true. The reason for it was caused by the U.S. government housing finance policies. And what I mean by that, to put that in perspective, let's take a look at the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis and the timeline that goes along with it. First, Congress set affordable housing goals for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that rose over time. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac reduced underwriting standards, eventually including no down payment loans to meet their goals. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's loosened underwriting standards spread to the rest of the housing finance market. Federal banking regulators changed their capital rules, providing greater incentives to hold mortgage-backed securities rather than mortgages. This created a massive 10-year housing bubble between 1997 and 2007. Now, understand that what occurred was because these mortgages were backed by Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, because these are federally backed mortgages. Even though the people who were taking on these mortgage obligations did not have the ability to pay these back, because the standards for taking on a loan, no down payment, most of them were on adjustable rate mortgage. The banks basically put all of these mortgages into tranches, or they put them all together so that they were tradable commodities. And because of the backing of the federal government, those commodities were basically labeled as grade A commodities. And so they were not risky. So banks were not, because there are regulations, by the way, and that's the key. Regulations are in place. They could not make risky investments. Well, these were said to be not risky at all, because they were mortgage-backed securities. So as the housing bubble began to deflate in early 2007, an unprecedented number of homeowners defaulted on their mortgages. The financial institutions that held these mortgages, or the mortgage-backed securities based on them, had to write them down to market value and take losses. Now, the government stepped in to rescue one of these financial institutions, Bear Stearns, which seemed to establish a policy that the government would rescue all large financial institutions, which in many cases they did. Assuming the government would act, managers of financial firms decided not to dilute their shareholders by raising substantial amounts of new equity. Similarly, creditors decided to hold their undervalued debt securities instead of taking losses. And that's key in how this whole thing played out. In September of 2008, the government reversed its policy, allowing Lehman Brothers, an investment bank larger than Bear Stearns, to file for bankruptcy, thus upending the assumptions of all market participants, creating a market panic and causing banks to hoard cash. In 2010, a Democrat-controlled Congress passed Dodd-Frank, and President Barack Obama signed it into law. Now, the key takeaways is that the financial markets were not deregulated prior to the 2008 financial crisis. Dodd-Frank did not end the too big to fail problem. Consumer protection existed prior to Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank was 1,000 pages long, and it's already spun off 22,000 pages in regulation. Now, imagine trying to digest all of that before you even open your doors for business. That doesn't help consumers. What it does is destroy small businesses in favor of big businesses who can afford the vast number of lawyers and accountants needed to comply. Dodd-Frank is consumer protection for billionaires. The very people that Democrats claim to want to go after are the very people that Democrats help the most. Republicans also believe that community banks should be relieved of excessive regulations, that no financial institution is too big to fail, and support legislation to ensure that the problems of any financial institution can be resolved through the bankruptcy code. And when it comes to regulating the banking industry, Republicans want to ensure that FDIC regulated banks are properly capitalized and taxpayers are protected against bailouts. This is the key. Republicans are focused on the solution, not the problem. Democrats are just focused on the problem. And the whole point of the reason why Democrats will never save our economy, that they will always drive our economy into bankruptcy, is because they are never looking for the real solution. They just want to continue blaming. They just want to try to create the illusion that if you just follow their lead, they're going to make everything better. And the problem is they keep spending money that they don't have to spend. When it comes to lending, Republicans want to end the government's use of the disparate impact theory, a legal theory of discrimination liability that holds employers, housing authorities, and other entities accountable for practices that have discriminatory effects on groups protected under anti-discrimination law, even when there's no intent to discriminate. This is what you call a microaggression. When you offend someone and you didn't know that you were offending them, it's your fault, not the person who is wrongly interpreting what you had to say. We will end this, the Republicans will end the government mandates that required Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac to federally insure banks to satisfy lending quotas to specific groups, since Republicans actually do believe that discrimination should have no place in the mortgage industry, while Democrats veil the discriminatory efforts that keep the poor dependent on them so they can stay in office, and so that the people who vote for them continue to dance. Keep dancing, slaves. Like Republicans, Libertarians favor free market banking with unrestricted competition among banks and depository institutions of all types. Those who enjoy the possibility of profits must not impose risks of losses upon others, such as through government guarantees or bailouts. Libertarians also support ending federal student loan guarantees and special treatment of student loan debt in bankruptcy proceedings. They also stipulate that individuals engaged in voluntary exchange should be free to use as money any mutually agreeable commodity or item. In other words, Libertarians are all about bartering as well, which should be perfectly fine if two parties are willing to exchange in that way. Now, Democrats want to strengthen banking regulations, including the Community Reinvestment Act, which was enacted in 1977 during the Carter administration, which requires federal banking agencies to encourage banks to meet the credit needs of their local communities, including low and moderate income neighborhoods. Here's the fundamental problems with this act. First, absent racial discrimination, which is subject already to attack under a variety of other federal laws, including the Equal Credit Opportunity and Fair Housing Acts, why don't Democrats want the free market to dictate what banks loan to their communities when it is consistent with financial safety and soundness? The act can only be understood as pressuring banks to make non-market loans, which is how the housing bubble and subsequent collapse was created in the first place. Second, why is this obligation put only on banks, but not other lenders like finance companies or credit unions? If the idea is that banks should invest a portion of local savings in the communities from which they are taking, this flies in the face of the basic idea behind banking to direct savings to their highest economic use. Third, it discourages banks from locating in poorer communities since they would be saddled with legal obligations to loan money. Now, see, Greens want their solution to all of this is just to simply break up our nation's largest banks and financial institutions so that no one is too big to fail. I'd like to see how that worked. And end taxpayer-funded bailouts for banks, insurers, and other financial companies, as Libertarians and Republicans had talked about. Reenact the Glass-Steagall Act, which they believe prohibited bank holding companies from owning other financial companies and engaging in risky economic transactions. Well, the 1933 Glass-Steagall Act is still admired by many who believe its separation of commercial and investment banking banned the high-risk activities that caused the Great Depression. So the first thing you should ask yourself is, well, then how did the 2008 collapse begin? If that's what they're trying to prevent, how did the 2008 crisis occur? There's some facts about this act that those who are advancing its full reinstatement don't address. The earliest and most noteworthy financial disasters during the 2008 crisis were at pure investment banks, Lehman, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, and pure commercial banks, Washington Mutual, Wachovia. Glass-Steagall type restrictions, even a modernized version, would not prevent banks from taking risky bets with insured deposits unless the restrictions prevent banks from making consumer and commercial loans, which is what banks do. Many analysts, historians, and even some court cases cite abusive and reckless investment practices Congress supposedly uncovered prior to passing Glass-Steagall. However, these claims almost always refer to secondary sources rather than the original record, or to opinions and allegations rather than actual evidence of abuses. Does this sound similar? Has Congress changed? I don't think so. The Glass-Steagall separation applied only to U.S. banks, domestic operations. Internationally, U.S. commercial banks regularly offered securities services. By the 1980s, the top 30 Eurobond underwriters were U.S. bank affiliates. In fact, Citicorp offered investment banking services in over 35 countries, and Chase Manhattan had offices in almost twice as many countries as 10 major investment banks combined. The more than 11,000 pages of testimony from the 1933 and 34 Senate Committee on Banking and Currency hearings provided no evidence, get this, no evidence regarding the safety and soundness of commercial banks and their securities affiliates. Much like the frenzied environment on Capitol Hill during the 2008 financial crisis and the passage of the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act, most of the Glass-Steagall related hearings were more focused on casting blame than shedding light on and actually fixing the problems that caused the crash. In both instances, we ended up with legislation that tried to design financial markets by dictating precisely who can take which financial risks. This approach does not make markets safer. Most importantly, it harms consumers via higher prices, fewer choices, and less opportunity because it protects firms from competing for consumers. Like Dodd-Frank, it's consumer protection for billionaires. Additionally, Greens want to ensure that low and middle income people have access to banking services, as if they didn't already, affordable loans, and by the way, affordable loans, what exactly is an affordable loan for someone who doesn't have the capacity to pay back a loan? A small business supporting capital, especially through credit unions. They want to support development of charter community development banks, which would be capitalized with public funds, again, government solution, and work to meet the credit needs of local communities. Now, that's what gambling a sucker bet with taxpayer funds looks like. The Green Party has got it down pat. Greens believe that the laws should be strengthened to protect consumers against foreclosure on their homes by banks and other lending agencies. Now, let that sink in just a moment. So someone takes out a mortgage. They can't pay their mortgage. And the bank is supposed to just say, okay? Yeah, this is lunacy. How about this? Public banking. Greens support public banking consistent with the greening the dollar plank. That is that the power to create money no longer resides with banks, private or public. The Texas Green Party just amplifies the insanity of the National Party, which requires banks to focus first on helping their communities, not making money or serving those evil, wealthy people and corporations, while making sure that the poor can have a bank account, even though whether or not they have money to put into it, not to mention doubling down on the Community Reinvestment Act, which is government's way of picking winners from losers, to each according to his need, from each according to his ability. This is the mantra of the left. And I wonder where they get that from. Neither Texas Democrats nor Libertarians address banking, but Republicans want to make it illegal for banks and financial institutions operating in Texas to make lending decisions based on anything other than financial concerns. How refreshing, those evil Republicans. They want fiscal responsibility. What are they thinking? When it comes to unions, collective bargaining, and the right to work, Republicans believe that all workers, including union members, must be free to accept raises and rewards without veto power from union officials, and that all unionized workers should be able to find out what's going on in their union trust funds in their executive compensation. Now, this basically is the Davis-Bacon law, which basically protects the unions from having to disclose to their union members what's going on with their finances, and it gives the power of unions. They can say, no, you can't get a raise because everyone would then have to have a raise if you did that. I love unions. Republicans support the right of states to enact right-to-work laws and call for a national law to protect the economic liberty of the modern workforce. And basically, right to work, understand, is the ability of a business to hire or fire you for cause. And just they don't have to with a union. By the way, try to fire a teacher. Good luck. Ain't gonna happen. And renews the call for repeal of the Davis-Bacon law, which limits employment and drives up construction and maintenance costs for the benefit of, guess who? Unions. That's right. Libertarians favor repealing any requirement that one must join or pay dues to a union as a condition of government employees. Okay, teachers? Support the right of private employers and employees to choose whether or not to bargain with each other through a labor union, because libertarians believe that bargaining should be free of government interference, such as compulsory arbitration or imposing an obligation to bargain. Amen, amen, and amen. Labor unions are essentially an extension of the Democrat Party that propagates the myth of increased wages and job standards for workers across the economy. Ultimately, labor unions want to keep everybody down. Everybody's equal. There are no exceptions. You're all part of the Democrat Party process. Don't you love that? This is why Democrats want to remove obstacles that block workers from unionizing, and why they want more national labor union-friendly legislation. Democrats say they will strengthen labor rights for more than 20 million public sector employees so that even though government employees create nothing that furthers our economy, they want bureaucrats to get even more perks and rights. Yes, I said that correctly. If you're not aware, did you know that government employees create nothing? Bureaucrats create nothing. They create no widgets that can be bought and traded on the open market that creates the economy, that builds the economy. They create nothing. So every time a bureaucrat is hired, and understand, if you're in business, you understand that the number one thing that you can control is employee cost. You can decide whether or not to hire a new employee, or whether not to hire an employee, or to cut back on employees, because it's the one factor, it's the one condition that you have the most control over. Government has no idea. They don't have the capacity to even fathom this idea. If they want more people, they just ask for it, and you have to pay for it, taxpayers. And Democrats want them to have more rights. Democrats will bolster Davis-Bacon to artificially increase wage standards, protect labor agreements, collective bargaining, neutrality, and domestic sourcing requirements are included in any infrastructure legislation, and will block anti-worker provisions, including forced arbitration. Greens will mandate and protect labor's right to organize, create unions, and negotiate with management in all countries receiving U.S. investments, and require U.S. corporations that operate in other countries to adhere to the core labor standards established by the International Labor Organization Declaration of the Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, not rights to work. They will also legislate and enable oversight by an independent agency. Watch this. They're going to enable oversight by either an independent agency or a labor union to verify that foreign workers are protected. Now, that is an objective observer, don't you think? The labor unions? Wow, I wonder what they're going to come up with. Texas green beans live up to the National Party and Democrats who believe to the National Party and Democrats who believe that the right to collective bargaining and union membership and representation should be available to any two or more workers who choose to exercise this right, adding that the right to organize and engage in collective bargaining belongs solely to each individual worker. Greens believe that illegal aliens, what they refer to as immigrant workers, deserve the just labor policies that provide them with the same economic and labor rights guaranteed to any resident or citizen of the United States, including the right to a Social Security number, the right to organize collectively. Can you just think about how asinine this idea is? You have 1,000 undocumented workers here illegally, and they're going to form a union, and they're going to demand things. How is this is Banana Republic 101 that Greens want. So that's your Green Party. Like the national platform, Texas Democrats want to mandate the right for employees to form or join a union in order to negotiate collectively with their employer without fear of union busting attacks or laws such as prohibitions on payroll deduction of union dues. And Democrats also want to ensure our judicial system protects the civil rights of labor organizers, campaign workers, and those working to improve workers' rights, and of course, repeal the right to work laws designed to weaken labor unions. Oh no. Texas Libertarians support the free, fair, and voluntary exchange of currency, goods, labor, services, and ideas whereby all may prosper through free market principles and individual responsibility. Plank 48 of the Texas GOP government accountability item reads, "We call upon the Texas legislature to eliminate all special collective bargaining statutes for public employees and to hold all public servants accountable to taxpayers through existing civil statutes. We oppose any distribution of taxpayer dollars to unions." One more thing about unions is when it comes to State Board of Education, unions support Democrats exclusively, and teachers unions. Teachers unions support Democrats exclusively, not Republicans. So teachers are not a friend of Republicans. Plank 52 on unions supports legislation requiring labor unions to obtain consent of the union member before that member's dues can be used for political purposes. Believe that government entities like teachers' unions from collecting dues for labor unions through deductions from public employee paychecks and encourage the adoption of a National Right to Work Act. Plank 68 argues that all jobs are essential, and in addition to legislation that states that very fact, establishes that governments do not have the authority to determine what entities are essential during an emergency. Amen. And by the way, when it comes to the whole shutdown on the COVID issue, Republicans are the only party, the only one, who addresses it directly. Libertarians don't. They don't want to talk about it. When it comes to labor and employment, the Republican National Platform reflects that the employer-employee relationship of the future will be built upon employee empowerment and workplace flexibility, which is why Republicans endorse employee stock ownership plans that enable workers to become capitalists, expand the realm of private property, and energize a free enterprise economy. To combat what Greens and Democrats called immigrant workers who are here illegally, Republicans advocate for the use of the E-Verify program, an internet-based system that verifies the employment authorization and identity of employees, which must be made mandatory nationwide. Both national and Texas libertarians are silent on labor and employment, but not Democrats. In an attempt to dissuade dissent with their leftist policies, Democrats pull out their trusty dusty race card stipulating that they cannot hope to raise wages without taking on profound racial biases at work in our employment system. Unemployment rates for people of color are persistently higher than the national average, which is why Democrats support making racial equality part of the mandate of the Federal Reserve. Now, it's interesting because Larry Elder was on the Dave Rubin show and set Dave Rubin straight on the issue, on this issue of racism, this whole idea of systemic racism. Listen to this.
What do you make of that when someone like, because I know you really rail against Jesse Jackson and these guys on the left that use, and I want to talk a lot about identity politics.
Okay.
So the guys that use these phrases, what are they going for there?
Well,
what is the goal there?
The goal is to tell black people that we're victims, that discrimination and racism remain major problems in America when in fact they don't. And they want black people to vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party gets 95% of the black vote, and the reason they get it is because blacks are convinced that the #1 issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with, and it's a bunch of nonsense. The #1 problem domestically facing this country is the breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it, I didn't. A black kid, or a kid, not just a black kid, a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
Right.
So Democrats never want to talk about the real issues of disparity among groups. They only want to highlight things that no longer exist, like, I don't know, systemic racism. Democrats believe that all employers funded by taxpayer dollars must pay their workers at least $15 an hour and protect workers' right to organize. So all the projects that you pay as a taxpayer, they're going to be even more expensive than they were before. And Democrats will take action to protect the rights of pregnant women in the workplace, including by requiring employers to make reasonable accommodations for pregnant and breastfeeding workers, which is already in place. Greens believe that work permits for citizens of Latin America and Canada must be easily attainable, thereby decriminalizing the act of gainful employment, so no more immigrant workers who are here illegally, I guess. Greens also advocate an end to employer sanctions, which have been shown to hurt not only the undocumented workers, or I'm guessing those are those here illegally, but also U.S.-born workers, specifically those of color. Why is it just specifically those of color? I guess I'm confused by the race card that the left consistently uses. By the way, whenever the left brings up race, it's because they have no other ground to stand on, because their argument is so shallow that it won't hold up water, so they just call up race. Racism. The focus on employers must be to vigorously enforce our wage and labor laws. Greens also support tax incentives for businesses that apply fair employee wage distribution standards and income tax policy that, watch this, restrict the accumulation of excessive individual wealth. That restrict the accumulation of excessive individual wealth. What exactly is excessive individual wealth? Will someone please, from the Green Party, who helped create this nonsensical platform, please explain what that means? Not only does Texas Green Party oppose the extension of the 40-hour work week, under any circumstances, they want it to be reduced below 40 hours. Greens believe that employees and communities must be given the same rights as stockholders in the decision-making process of corporations. In other words, owners of a business no longer get to call the shots. Greens further want a citizen who serves on jury duty to be paid one full day's living wage for each one missed by the court of jurisdiction. In other words, taxpayers and without that's who's going to pay for it, and without penalties or reduction of benefits by the worker's employer. They also want workers to receive 1 half day off from work on election day. How exactly does that work? So teachers on election day, they get half day off work. How does that? Police get half day off work on election day. How does that work? Democrats will require that all employment positions guarantee retirement and health benefits, equal pay for equal work, safe working conditions, and workers' compensation insurance, paid sick leave, paid vacation leave, paid family leave, workplace accommodation for child nursing, and payment of prevailing wages for public projects. Whew. This, my friend, is what's called an unfunded mandate by government. Democrats want to weaponize the judicial system to bolster labor unions that we talked about before, while also repealing right-to-work laws designed to weaken labor unions and protect the American worker. Big surprise. As we continue, Texas Libertarians support free, fair, and voluntary exchange of currency, goods, labor, services, and ideas whereby many may prosper through the free market principles and individual responsibility. Now, Texas Republicans support maximum economic opportunities for all citizens and believe that legal limits on employee ownership of Texas firms by employee stock ownership plans, trusts must be eliminated, and support the removal of laws and regulations that are used to force business owners and employees to violate their conscience, sincerely held beliefs, or core values. Republicans encourage the Texas legislature to preempt local government efforts to interfere with the state's sovereignty over business, employees, and property rights. When it comes to the minimum wage, the Republican National Platform states that this is an issue that should be handled at the state and local level, and the Texas platform, as you'll see in a little moment, in a few minutes, actually says we should eliminate the minimum wage. Oh, wait a minute, that's racist. That's going to hurt those of the poor. Not so, says Thomas Sowell. Mr. Sowell is a self-proclaimed Marxist, former Marxist, who started to investigate the minimum wage. He started to investigate the realities, the facts, the scientific evidence, as Democrats like to say, the evidence, the empirical evidence for himself, and realized that the minimum wage did more to hurt the poor than it did to help. But let him tell you himself.
If you look at the unemployment rate of black teenagers in 1948, 1949, it is a fraction of what it has been in any recent decade. And 1949 was a recession year, so the black teenage unemployment rate in 1949 was a fraction of what it was in even the most prosperous years of the 1990s.
And this is because the federal minimum wage said you must pay every worker at least this much.
Yes.
And when there was no minimum wage, kids, everybody, but particularly you're talking now about black teens,
Yeah.
could get paid
Whatever.
$1.50 an hour
See, but
for
the other
carbon,
thing-
but they could get employment. They could
Yes.
start learning skills. They could reach the first rung on the ladder, so to speak.
Yes,
That's what's, all right.
and people move up very quickly. I mean, McDonald's has over 100% turnover a year. People say he's out flipping hamburgers. Yes, he's flipping hamburgers in January. Does not mean he's going to be flipping hamburgers in December.
He's
Somewhere,
learning how to get to work on time, how to get a
that's
deal with
right, and he's
coworkers.
not going to be. He's going to start up the ladder.
Right.
But what was different about the late 1940s was the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 specified what the minimum wage would be. The runaway inflation of the 1940s made that number meaningless.
I see.
So for all practical purposes, inflation had repealed the minimum wage law.
I see.
Thank God I was a teenager in those years. And you know, when I started out my first full-time job as a Western Union messenger, my starting pay was 50% above the federal minimum wage because inflation had made the federal minimum wage meaningless. And so under those conditions, in 1948, black 16 and 17-year-olds had an unemployment rate under 10% and slightly less than that of white teenagers the same age. Now, as you come in, and the liberals say, no, we've got to catch up with inflation. Starting in 1950, they escalated the minimum wage regularly, and then you began to see these horrendous rates of unemployment among black teenagers.
Yeah, so this is what happens when we try to control the free market. And as Thomas Sowell articulated, you're basically hurting the very people that you say that you are protecting. Even though they make more money, because the minimum wage, as I said, it's the one control that a business owner has. You hire fewer people. So while you pay them more, you basically can only hire so many workers. So that's one of the problems with it, and how inflation has an impact on the minimum wage as well. But let's continue. Both the national and state libertarian platforms are silent on the minimum wage, but Democrats and green beans love this issue. Democrats will fight to raise wages for working people and improve job quality and security, including by raising the federal minimum wage so it reaches $15 an hour by 2026. They believe that raising the federal minimum wage so fewer workers are forced to hold down multiple jobs to make ends meet, when in reality there will be more workers who will be out of a job and will not be able to have a second job because they're not available to them. Green beans believe that the federal minimum wage for all workers should be indexed to inflation and adjusted regularly to ensure that all workers nationwide continue receiving a living wage. In addition to eradicating gratuity for restaurant workers, Greens say they will ensure a livable income for all people with the vision for a universal basic income. While Texas Republicans will repeal the minimum wage, as I said before, Texas Democrats will double down on it by ensuring that the minimum wage in Texas is a living wage indexed to inflation. Like the National Party, Texas green beans support what they call a living wage that would allow all 35 hours or more a week minimum wage workers to afford a one-bedroom apartment in the communities in which they work. Democrats running for office try to create the false narrative that Republicans are against Social Security and want to eradicate Social Security. That is absolutely not true. How can I say that with such conviction? Well, the reason I can say that is because I look at the national platform where it highlights the fact that we are the only party trying to preserve it as a moral obligation to the promises made by government. It doesn't mean that we don't see the reality that Social Security is moving toward insolvency. It cannot be sustained for a long time, indefinitely, which is why the free market should come into play. In doing so, Republicans, as I said, oppose tax increases and believe in the power of the markets to create wealth and to help secure the future of our Social Security system. Libertarians assert that retirement planning is the responsibility of the individual, not the government, and would phase out. Notice that they don't want to they also are not trying to eradicate it, but phase out the current governmental-sponsored Social Security system and transition to a private voluntary systems, as do Republicans, which is also embraced by any of the financial experts and economists. Why? Because the Social Security system is going bankrupt. The worst thing that we could do is add more to it, try to put more burden on Social Security, create more obligations to the Social Security system. We need to be finding ways to move people, migrate them away from this inevitably insolvent system. Democrats say they will enact policies to make Social Security more progressive, including increasing benefits for all beneficiaries, meaningfully increase minimum benefit payments, increasing benefits for long-term duration beneficiaries, and protecting surviving spouses from benefit cuts. Never mind how to pay for it or bring it out of insolvency. Let's just promise more. Democrats will reject every effort to cut, privatize, or weaken Social Security and will ensure Social Security will be there forever, which is a lie, empirically speaking. Democrats call their approach to the supplemental Social Security income and Social Security disability insurance programs holistic, which actually, holistic, I think what they mean by that is that it's going to bring the whole economy down with it by expanding it and promising that it will go on forever. Forever and ever. Now, like Democrats, Greens take a pie-in-the-sky approach, arguing it is essential to the well-being of our seniors and maintenance of a system's integrity, which the system has no integrity, is an essential part of a healthy community. Even though there is no structural integrity to the Social Security system at all, Green Beans oppose privatization of Social Security and, like Democrats, seek to expand its effectiveness, quote unquote. It's basically this idea, I know that I must still have money in the bank because I still have checks. This is essentially what Green Beans and Democrats are saying. Greens will require minimum pensions for all workers, fully vested and portable, that do not reduce Social Security benefits. Good luck with that. Green Beans are a rubber stamp of the National Party, but in addition to preventing the privatization of Social Security, they want to afford illegal aliens the same right to Social Security number as any American citizens, just as the Democrats. Like the National Party, Texas Democrats also want to expand Social Security, ensure a decent retirement, whatever that means. And if you were on the platform committee in Texas and you can explain what that means, please let us know, because we're dying to find out. They will also mandate that Social Security remains an essential federal government program and preserve the state retirement system as defined in the benefit systems. Now, while Texas Libertarians remain silent, Texas Republicans want to see the Social Security system privatized. Well, that, my friends, is the differences between the parties, and I hope that this was helpful for you as we look at this. Now, this is not the only one. I'm going through the different platform issues, and I hope that you will stay with me. If you haven't already, hit the like button, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. It is great to be with you. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow or the next at the next meeting. And until then, I hope that you have a very, very blessed day. Until next time, my friends.